Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Inquire, the show that aims to bring people together from across a wide range of different worldviews to explore ideas and share life. This week, I'm very excited to do part two of a conversation that we started last week with Rich Tutt talking about the creation account in the Bible's book of Genesis, the first few chapters especially. Paul Frost, who's well known to us, and those of you who are regular listeners of the show will know Paul and his views already on some things. But today we're going to listen in on a conversation between Paul and Rich. Paul's listened to Rich's comments and first part of this two-part conversation about the creation account of Genesis. And well, without further ado, Paul, we're going to kick straight off and get you to share your reply and your response to many of the things that Rich shared in his presentation.
But I enjoyed them. Thanks once again for the absolutely thoroughly engaging and intriguing position that you put forward in that, and I really enjoyed it in the creation account. I suppose if I put my marker down right at the beginning, there are two major problem words right at the outset. One is God, and the second is created. And when you put them together, you really got a problem. But I'd like to speak, I think, about four themes, if you don't mind, and they are these. Religion and science. Why look again at Genesis? Really, why? I think I have a point of view as to why you did that. I'll give you my sense of what the fundamental problem is, and then offer you a way forward. In terms of the first one, I guess it was sparked by Jez's introduction, which was particularly intriguing. He chose to introduce you as a pastor, as a physicist, as a mathematician, and not of the many myriad of other things that you are, I assume. I guess he did that because it felt like he was saying, hey guys, check this out. Here's a smart scientist, he's a smart mathematician, and he's a Christian. So boy, you can dig right in there and believe it, because not only is a Christian, but a scientist. It's true. Must be the case. And this is something I've observed on many occasions, actually. Christians looking to juxtapose their position with, it's a common trait, trying to say, people of science support Christianity, must be legitimate, must be true. And Christians seem to roll out their scientific credentials often. And it seems to me to actually just confess a weakness in the conceptual position of Christianity to do that. If you need to say a scientist believe it, it must be true, then you've got a problem. It seems to me that the way to go about it for Christianity is not to try and square their beliefs with science, but rather to examine Christianity, its intent, its purpose, its the independent truth of Christianity, without invoking science and scientists and your credentials like that at the beginning. To invoke the language of scientific method, you're fighting the fight on the wrong terrain, guys, in my opinion, by doing that. Forgive me. It's intriguing to me is some of the things you wanted to do, which were to remove the conflict with science, make it congruent with 21st century science, or some of the things you said. And I'm thinking, well, why 21st century science? Why not make it congruent with 19th century science, or 20th century science, or 22nd century science? Why pick this science that you want to make it congruent with? I wonder in part that because also science is sometimes not right. It's not learned enough. Maybe science should investigate and recognize it does need to investigate the natural, the supernatural. Science is never static, never the same. So it seems it seems an error, guys, to go there, really. And it seems to use the word science to mean natural science, not science in terms of philosophy or humanities in terms of science. And it seems to me the religion discussion, any discussion about religion, is really about philosophy, spirituality, and not simply 21st century physics, subatomic, cosmic, whatever that might be. And so I'm just intrigued, and I'll probably echo back to this towards the end about this juxtaposition of religion and science. But thanks for that, and for permitting me that. It feels like a bit of an aside on what Jesus has got us here to do, but I may want to come back to that in a second. I had to think about why there'd been a reinterpretation at all. And it's great to know that that there was a Hebrew version. I guess if I'd thought about it, maybe there was going to be that, and to be able to do that seems quite amazing, Rich. If one can do that, and I think one of what I wanted to do was this for a moment was just check out. So I understood what I think you said. I think you said this is not about science-faith debate. We don't want to juxtapose these two. But with an echo, that was quite interesting, given the introduction and the whole thing about setting you up as a scientist. If we're not juxtaposing these things, then it's like, well, let's not bother then. But anyway, there was that. So I had this kind of curiousness about it. And I think, Rich, you said Genesis doesn't deny the Big Bang. In fact, it says that it would be wrong, I think you said, to go against arrogant, I think was your word, to go against this. You said, I think, Rich, and I want to put this out there for you to correct me in a minute. God created the heavens and the earth, bang. But here's how he did it. And then it goes on to say, I think you said, let me tell you about the God that created it and why it was created. You, I think, came back and said, look, there's no point in polarizing the debate between science and faith. Not pushing the creationists out is not helpful. People shouldn't be forced to pick. I think I understood you to say that Genesis is not about how did it all start, rather about who are we, how do we experience life in the way that do, why do we do, and then you went on to say a few things like, well, it sounds poetic. It's not a step-by-step guide, and I'm happy to go along with that, Rich. It certainly sounds like poetry to me, for sure. It is poetry. It can't possibly be a step-by-step guide. I absolutely agree. If you tell me it's setting out to answer different questions, no problem. That's all no problem for me. My question is, so what? Big deal. So it's not that. It can't figure out. Doesn't seem that important to me.
Yeah.
You went on to say that the real issue was, and this did ring true of the time, was that the chapter wants us to believe that, or wanted the people of the time and subsequently to believe, actually, there's only one all-powerful God, not lots. It's a polemic, you argue, against ancient societies and civilizations who had multiple gods. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created everything, I think is your position. It tells us a lot about God himself, you say, how he did it, and he made this for us to inhabit. And I was thinking about all of this and thinking, why this reinterpretation? It's clearly, actually, it seems like it's a big issue in the narrow confines, the myopic paradigm of Christianity. It seems like a big deal. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have gone to all that trouble. And so I find myself wondering, why is that then? And I came up with two possible explanations, which probably don't accord with yours. But anyway, here they are. One is, it helps with science. It'll help bring science on board. All these scientists that are pounding you about it's not in the right order and the language is not right. If you reinterpret it this way, the reinterpretation can say to some scientists, so just on the cusp, thinking, look, you can come in. You can come into the tent, really, under this reinterpretation of Christianity, and certainly Genesis. You can cut back. It gives you something to counter what you see as science arguments. Therefore, the critique of the attack on Christianity from some scientists can be lessened by this reinterpretation. But it seems more significantly to me that reinterpretation is about reducing the splits between the creationists and the neoliberal Christians, because there seems to be an issue. Your church is split, from what I understood you to have said. The creationists with one particular view, you perhaps feeling like a neoliberal in your Christian perspective, reinterpreting it, enables you then to say, maybe we can find a narrative, as you said, we don't want to be arguing with them. So maybe we can find a reinterpretation which gets them under the same tent as well. All Christians can tolerate, if not unite, they can tolerate this interpretation. Well, in fact, from my perspective, whilst this may be a big issue, really, there is no difference between creationists and neoliberals. Their position is fundamentally the same at rock bottom. And the two propositions that you both seem to support are A, there was an intelligent designer, and B, that there is a purpose or point to it all. You both seem to believe that God created. And with that, you are united. The others, forgive me, it feels like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, does this? As you fiddle around with these words. Your differences are poetic, your differences are about order, but insignificant in the really big things. It feels to me like you agree, and therefore it really only is about bringing them on board, it feels, maybe to deafen the noise. The real question that starts to arrive is when you start thinking about the why did we get here? And I've had lots of smart chats with very smart Christians, Rich. The one opposite me now in the middle of the screen being one of them. There's this great delight in defending the position with metaphor. Metaphors which are interesting but simply distracting. I hear the metaphor of the watchmaker, the watch and the watchmaker all the time. How could it not be the case, it says. This beautiful watch, this beautifully designed instrument had to have a maker. It can only be done by an intelligent, purposeful God, and therefore watchmaker. From my point of view, this position is mistaken at so many levels. It's just wrong. It confuses the creation of non-organic watch and the development of things which are organic, and assumes they're the same. Assumes that just because a watch, a finite object, is designed and put there, that travels as a metaphor. It doesn't. And I hear it so often as a way of convincing. It also misunderstands what the nature of life on earth is about. To analyze these questions, big questions, from within the text, even a reinterpreted text, it's all too restricting. It's too limiting. These questions are so big that Christianity can't deal with them. You need to step outside your paradigm of Christianity. You need to step outside the mental limitations which the faith puts upon you. The straitjacket which brings the analysis brought that reinterpretation and brought it for a particular set of reasons. Genesis and the Bible are not illuminating. They are constraining on any central core analysis of these fundamental questions. And that's why it feels like simply shifting the deck chairs. The fundamental problem is here. And here I need to be careful because in my excitement as it's brewing now, I have invented what I've called the AA problem. The real issue of Christianity is the AA problem. Arrogance and anxiety. Let me replace arrogance with egotism, self-importance, an absolute failure to recognize the manifest insignificance of the human race, of human life in the course of the universe. Arrogance then. And secondly, anxiety. And anxiety, there must be a purpose to it. God, I've got to have a purpose. God, give me the purpose. There must be a purpose, but there isn't. And that dual issue, the AA problem, has its roots in one assumption and 6 therefores. And it's this. The assumption is the Christians assume that we are significant, that we are jeweled watch. Therefore, This can't be a result of accident. It can't be happenstance. We're so good. We're so central. We're so important. Andrew Wilson denies the fact that the chances of it occurring by happenstance, 1 over 10 to the power 60, he tells me, can't possibly have happened. The answer is, he's wrong. It did. So the assumption was so significant. 2, that therefore it can't be a result of an accident and happenstance. Therefore, the conditions must have been created for us to be here. Therefore, somebody or something must have created it. Therefore, there must be a meta being who had a point to put us here. Therefore, the meta being must have designed the environment for us. Therefore, the meta being must be intelligent. But all those therefores begins from one assumption, and that's all it is, an assumption that we are important, a denial of the reality of 1 over 10 to the power 60, and therefore you work all the way towards therefores. You get a sense of this meta being you like to title God. You like to assume that the God is an intelligent, purposeful designer of the universe. This is a function of a harshly expressed word of arrogance. Egocentrism at the heart of Christianity, which assumes you are important. The challenge to Christians is to examine the questions without that, take that assumption away and look at the question and see what happens. You need to look at the ontological underpinnings of what you're asking. Question them. Non-Christians do not have the same, the people who do not have the AA problem, I would think, tend not to be Christians. They don't tend to be religious in their focus. So rather than simply explaining why I'm here, I'm interested in tracing the steps of how it became here. You spend your time as Christians looking the wrong way down the telescope, looking to explain the significance of now, as if now is of significance. And it simply isn't. And if you could, for a moment, suspend your disbelief about that, and then ask, how did we get here? It is simply the case. We are here because we are here. If you weren't here because of those steps, you wouldn't be asking the question. It is that the 1 over 10 to the power 60, that's what happened. That's why you're here. There are no therefores. There is no special purpose to it. I don't need a meta being to explain why I'm here. I don't need a meta being to give me a purpose for it. The issue of harmony and the purpose of life, I am not out of harmony with myself because I'm out of harmony with God. Or in fact, more particularly, I'm out of harmony with a set of regulations which a set of human beings wrote down in a book, maybe called the Ten Commandments or maybe not. That sense of harmony which Jez drew you to talk about, Rich, I just don't see it that way. Your whole position about you're happy, fulfilled if you're in harmony with your God. If you're not in harmony with God, you're not happy. I am much reminded of the Marxian notion of false consciousness. The first thing that Marxists have to do is to convince you how unhappy you are, and then to let you know, I've got the solution. You are unhappy, Rich. I'll bring you God, and that will sort you out. In harmony with God, you'll be happy. It so much feels like the Marxian notion of false consciousness, this whole sense of harmony and God. The absence of, let me share with you, the absence of a meta purpose from a God is not nihilism. People want to know from me often, how can you live every day, Paul, with no purpose? The answer is no, it's the wrong question. It's not that I do not have a purpose. I do not need a meta being, God or other, to give me that purpose. Without that purpose, I am not in a state of disharmony. I am not unhappy. Life, we're at a particular point in an infinitely long life. Look at the year 30-30, the year 40-40, the year 50-50. Things will be different. The human race will be dead and gone. With nothing lost, it'll have been here transitory. In the entire expanse, picking now, guys, and then drilling everything from the centricity of that is what causes you the problem, and therefore gives you the AA problem, and which causes you to need to be Christians and believe in God to sort that out. Therefore, the issue about science is that some scientists also have the AA problem. So non-scientists have the AA problem, and that's what determines whether you're Christians or non-Christians. So show me a scientist who said they're a Christian. It's like, no problem. They got the AA problem. That's why they're Christians. They're looking for answers to things. So I'm almost there. Into the way forward is for you to accept at least that there are a possibility of other explanations, a possibility that human life is not as central as you think it is. Question that assumption, and therefore all the six therefores that follow. That you are here asking questions because you are here, as simple as that. There's insufficient evidence to me to convert your hypothesis of a creative, intelligent design, to convert that to knowledge. It just lacks the evidence for that. There's an evolutionary trail. It seemed to me about your kind of conceptual definition of intelligent designer is simply hypothetical. And if we can get together on that, this will be a short conversation. You tell me you think the entire thing is hypothetical. The entire Bible is nothing but one hypothesis, lacking evidence to support it. At the moment, we're good. I've never yet found a Christian who's prepared to say that, though. Not ever. They're happy to agree that my position is hypothetical, that my position requires evidence, but not theirs. Not ever. By staying within the kind of Christian paradigm, trying to sort out the attacks on science, trying to sort out the internal fights between the creationists and the neoliberals, you are missing the big questions. You're missing the big considerations. Give me a conceptual answer to the question, who is God? At a conceptual level. Microscopic readings and rereadings of Genesis, as hard and significant as they are, they're there for other reasons. They do not come. These microscopic reasons, you're just lost in the weeds of Christianity, really. There are multiple conceptual considerations of God. I can hypothesize for you because I've done them for Jez on many, at least three. All, none of which I argue are correct, but they are hypothetically possible. Just as Christianity is hypothetically possible. It is hypothetically possible that there was an intelligent designer. There was a purposeful being. There is no evidence to support it yet, but perhaps there will be. Perhaps science in 3030 will come to be your aid, but at the moment, there is not. Therefore, my reflections on the reinterpreting of Genesis are, it's done for a particular set of reasons, and sadly, causes a myopia which caused the big questions, the big analysis, to not get done. Maybe one day it'll be true, but not now.
Excellent. Paul, thank you so much. Wow, that was very interesting, and to sit and to just allow you that space to think and to express that. I'm really grateful just to be able to hear your arguments in their strongest form, and that experience of feeling slightly uncomfortable as someone fires lots and lots of statements at you, attacking a deeply held and strongly held position, and something that's so important to me. It feels uncomfortable, and I think that's part of the beauty of being able to have conversations like this, is to allow that uncomfortable dissonance to sit there some and think it over, rather than just instantly reply to everything you say and said. So thank you so much, Paul, and Rich, thank you for being part of this experience and for subjecting yourself to Paul's ideas there and thoughts, which I think, again, it's very uncomfortable at times, but really helpful for us to have meaningful conversations like this. Well, there's lots that Paul shared there that I know, no doubt, Rich, you want to come back on. I mean, firstly, it was my introduction of Rich using his scientific credentials that you attacked. So, Rich, you don't need to defend yourself on that. That's entirely my bad. But, Rich, where do you want to start in your reply to some of what Paul shared?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. Thank you. I think the place I want to start is and this won't, as you suggested, probably shortcut the discussion. I'm really happy to agree with you that Christianity is a hypothetical possibility. I'm very happy to say that there were at least two possible explanations for everything that we're going to talk about. One of which is there is a God as described in the Bible, and one of which is there is no God, and the things they just are and there's no purpose. I don't find it difficult to envisage that as a possibility, and I don't think anything I'm going to say, I'm not putting any of it forward as, here is the definitive smoking gun proof that God exists, and if you can't see it, you haven't followed the arguments.
Right.
All I'm going to do, I think, is talk about why I think there is enough, and I'll use it in a very broad sense at the moment, evidence to suggest that the Christian faith is a coherent and possible position, rather than anything that I'm going to say it is definitely proved through what I'm going to say. So in that sense, I'm happy to talk about two hypotheses, one of which there's a God, one of which there isn't. I think that's a very sensible way to talk about it. Obviously, I personally have a belief in one of those hypotheses in the way that you have a belief in one of the other hypotheses. But I think the interesting thing always is talking to people about why we hold those beliefs, and is it a blind belief? Is it based on faulty presuppositions? Is there evidence to support it? And having been a Christian for 30 years, I've spent lots of it looking and trying to say, look, is there a sensible, strong, believable case for Christianity? Or am I wrong? Have I got this wrong? Did I make a mistake at 17 when I decided that, you know, I did believe Jesus was the Son of God? Because if I'm wrong, I want to know about it. I don't want to be one of those guys who just kind of say, well, look, I believe it, I know I'm right, don't talk to me, I don't want to interact with anything, because I think that's a position that lacks intellectual integrity. And I think to have any kind of position, you have to be willing to answer the question, what would it take to change my mind? Otherwise, you're really not debating or anything. So I don't think that will shortcut our discussion, as you suggested at the end, but I completely recognise and agree with your kind of way of viewing the discussion. I think that's very clear thinking.
Rich, I applaud you for that. You're the first Christian, and I've met several through Jez. It's the first one. Did you say that too?
I've said that to you plenty of times. Thank you. Saying that I've never met a Christian who's willing to accept this as a hypothesis. I say that to you every time we have this conversation. You've never heard a Christian say it, meaning you've never accepted that they meant it.
I'm deaf to their protestations. Yeah.
Rich, but carry on.
Yeah.
Rich, yeah.
So that's the first thing. I think the things that I'd knock a few things out quickly, okay, and then we may find that there's more interesting stuff to discuss. The science thing, you know, obviously that was Jez sticking it in there to kind of make it look good. But I do take your point on it, that Christians can sometimes say, look, I've got a scientist who believes this, therefore this is, you know, you want to listen to this guy, he's got a lab coat on a row of biros and that sort of thing. My position, in whenever I talk about the kind of putting together of science and faith, is not to say, look, this is going to be true. For me, it's more taking what I think is a mistaken obstacle out of the way. I would say it's to get rid of the mistaken view that if you believe in modern science, in whatever that phrase means, you can't therefore believe in the God of the Bible. And I would say that's demonstrably untrue, because there are Christians who believe it and who believe in that. So my interaction with the science from that side of things is just getting rid of an unnecessary obstacle. But I still recognise there are challenges faced by it. I think in terms of the phrase you used a lot, the idea of reinterpretation of Genesis, I would take strong issue with that. I don't think what I'm doing is a reinterpretation of Genesis. I think I would put it either in terms of a rediscovery of Genesis, not particularly in terms of, oh, look what I've discovered, no one's seen this before, but let's read it as people would read it, A, when it was originally written, maybe 3,500 years ago, B, how people may well have read it and did read it before the church got into this silly entrenched position over sort of Darwinism. And there's a whole lot of Christian thinkers back in the past who wouldn't come to this and say, this is clearly an ABC textbook of how it was produced. So I don't think I'm reinterpreting it. I think I'm rediscovering what the original writer, whether or not he's inspired by God, I believe he was, you don't. What did he want to communicate? And particularly when I read it in Hebrew, and as I read it in Hebrew, I don't find it feels like this has been written to refute a sort of Darwinism that hasn't yet been invented. It feels like it's written to describe life and God and the reasons for some of the difficulties we face. So for me, it feels like a more authentic reading rather than a kind of let's reinvent it to get around some of the difficulties that people have with it. And the third thing I think is, which again I hope is an easy one just to get rid of, is the idea that I'm under no illusions that by presenting a kind of a discussion of Genesis, kind of rearranging deck chairs, keeping different Christian camps happy, that it's going to particularly persuade anybody that there's a God. I never really start when I'm talking with anybody about faith and why I believe in Genesis. I always start with Jesus, and for me, that was both how I came to faith and also how I think it's logical to discuss it. So for me, it all comes down to, who is Jesus? Was he who he says he was? Is there any kind of historical evidence for who he says he was and what he claimed to be? Once you start engaging with that, one of the questions that pops up in my mind before I was a believer, and in many people, is, well, hang on, isn't Genesis wrong? Therefore, we can throw away the whole Bible. And the second kind of thing that comes up is then, well, okay, if I'm taking Jesus on board as I find him in the New Testament, are there implications about that for how I might view other parts of the Bible and other ways of looking at the world? So for me, it's Jesus first, Genesis second. And my personal interest in Genesis simply comes out of, okay, as a believer in Jesus, I wonder what that means for how I view creation issues, Genesis, that kind of thing. So those are the ones that I hope are fairly non-controversial and maybe fairly sort of bullet points.
Yeah.
I think it depends what we want to talk about for the rest of the time. Jez, we've got limited time. What do you want us to chat about?
Yeah, so one of the things that Paul, I think that the AA problem that you have helpfully come up with and coined, maybe, Paul, and I think the Christian use of metaphors, particularly the blind watchmaker metaphor, which I know, Paul, you were quite impassioned as you were talking about it then, and I think you've often quoted that Andrew Wilson number to me and said, it is like unlikely, but it happened. Get over it. So, Rich, perhaps just so your comments would be a good starting place.
Well, if we start on 1 in 10 to the minus 60, the sort of the fine-tuning argument, I think, again, we're both saying the same thing on that. We're saying, if you looked at it without having happened, you would say that's extremely unlikely. We wouldn't buy a ticket for the lottery with that coming up. But we both agree, but it is like that. It's happened. The only difference is, I think, I'm possibly suggesting a possible reason for that, in that maybe that was the way God created it so that things could exist. You're simply saying, we don't have to know the reason for that. It just is. But I think the argument that it's so unlikely that it would never happen unless it was fixed, it cheats both ways. I'm cheating if I say to you, that is definitive proof that there must be a God, because it's impossible for the universe to exist statistically otherwise. Because what I'm actually doing then is arguing from the gaps, aren't I? I'm saying we don't yet currently know any reason why those approximately 15 physics constants take the value they do. Therefore, there can't be one other than God created it. There could be a completely obvious and logical reason why the values take those values, and they're the only values that can exist. And so it's not a smoking gun. It's not a bullet, a magic bullet that proves it. For me, it's part of a cumulative weight of philosophical arguments, such as why is there something rather than nothing, excuse me, not how did it happen, but why is there something? It's really unlikely if these values are random, which we don't yet know. Why is there consciousness? Why is there beauty? Why do we believe in right and wrong? They're objective facts, those kind of things. They're kind of philosophical arguments that when I put them together with Jesus and the evidence for his resurrection, both Christianity and my own personal experience, creates a picture. So like you, I don't think that's a smoking gun that means we have to believe. You wanted to chip in on that, I think.
Yeah, I think the issue is, I have all those questions too. Why consciousness? Why philosophy? Why sadness? Why love? They are legitimate questions. I guess the thing I'm trying to get to is they deserve to be examined outside of the what feels sometimes like the myopic Christian view. There are other ways of addressing that. It's not, and maybe all too often people have run me back to, because that's how it was created, and it's like, no. One step happened, another step happened, another step happened. As many trillion steps as you liked it to be that, because if they hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here asking how did we get here. It's just a tautology, really. But I have equally as much interest in what is consciousness, what is love, how did we get here? Why are we here? I mean, but the why are we here does, I think, run to the AA problem. And I think that what I would welcome your comments on is, which people have so many times, through metaphor or not, asserted that the precise structure of human life is so significant. That's the starting assumption. If you shift that starting assumption, all the subsequent therefores collapse at least. That you don't have to end up with, we are so complex, so beautiful, so good, so thinking, so loving. We must have been designed. That whole edifice collapses if you remove that one assumption.
Yes,
I just
agree with you.
experienced Christians unprepared, unwilling to shift that assumption. Because, and then if you do that and answer the question, why are we here? What are we for? You then can ask, because I am quite content with my position. It's not, I don't view life in a nihilistic way, which many Christians think I must do. How do I get out of bed in the morning if I'm not being given a purpose by a meta being? And the truth is, I just do. I don't need it, don't have it. I don't have the questions. And it seems Christianity wants to give me the questions and convince me of my unhappiness and my disharmony, to which it then can come with the cavalry called God and help me with the answer. And that I really would appreciate your reflection. That kind of knot, I'd appreciate your reflections on.
I personally think what you've described is a very accurate description of how many Christians present the gospel. It's a, I don't think it's particularly the right way to go about things. My position, how I try and present things, is not so much, hey, let me tell you how really unhappy you are. Hey, I've got a magic snake oil solution. Would you like some? Because it falls down as soon as you meet anybody who says, well, I'm not unhappy. And then you suddenly find yourself trying to persuade them that they are unhappy. So I think that's a disingenuous way to do it. So I agree with you on that as well. Where I try and come from, and obviously I kind of don't get it right all the time, is more a position of, look, I think this is true, that Jesus is the Son of God breaking into our world. And if he is, there are implications for us and our lives, one of which would be, I think, if we find ourselves in step with God, we find ourselves more at peace with God and ourselves. But I wouldn't start there and say, hey, are you not at peace? Come to God and you can get peace, because I think that's, again, the wrong way around. I try and logically look at it as saying, is this true or not? If it's not true, we can forget about it and we can look in all sorts of other ways. If it is true, we do need to look a little bit closer. And so my plea to most people that I talk to on this, and it would be probably a bit rude to say it to you, because I suspect you have, but is, let's just look a bit closer at Jesus rather than saying, hey, let me tell you why you'll feel a lot better if you come to Christ. The Bible's full of people who come to Christ and life gets a lot worse for them in all sorts of ways. There's a cost to it. Jesus talks about take up your cross and follow me, die to self. So it's not I think it's a very 20th century way of selling religion by saying this will give you a really great life, because that's what people are looking for in our culture.
I mean, one thing that would be interesting to do, and maybe one would do it, we could do it now, but perhaps not, is to use the kind of the Aristotle or originally without the proof by contradiction, the method of proof by contradiction. I was listening to something about Alan Turing and the halting problem and his proof by contradiction. So let's start by assuming that it's false. That in fact, there is no meta being, there is no intelligent designer. That whole thing is false, and then running this proof by contradiction until it runs into the sand. And then, as you would know, I guess, if the contraposition is disproved, then the original position must be correct. But playing it my way, I never run into the sand. I never run into that contra position being untrue, and therefore it remains true. Yeah. And so that proof by contradiction. It would give it more thought by both of us, but maybe a game worth playing at some point.
I think it could be, but I think we would probably find it a bit frustrating, because I think what we would find is we've probably both run through the two options. If there's no God, what about? if there is a God, what about? I think if either of us were going to run that kind of thought experiment through, which we've done before, and found a smoking gun, we'd be the king of philosophy, wouldn't we? You know, we'd have solved the greatest problem ever. I think which is why I think I cannot demonstrate to you that my belief is true, but what I can try and do is demonstrate is at least coherent. It's why at least plausible. It's, you know, I can run both an atheistic worldview and a Christian worldview through that kind of matrix and come up with believable, plausible explanations for both of them. I then have to look at them and think, well, they could both be true. Which one do I find most consistent and least forced? And at the moment, I'm saying what I find least forced is the Christian position, because when I look at the events of the life and death and alleged resurrection of Jesus and the birth of Christianity, I find there the strongest and most difficult knot to untie if I've got an atheistic position, because it seems like it sprung up in a context and a culture where nobody was going to take it seriously, and there was many things against it. So when I go through those kind of logical kind of sequences in my mind, that's where I most often run aground rather than anything else.
You only have one type of data and one data source for your proof, which is...
It's not a proof. I wouldn't use the word proof.
Okay. You have one data source, which is the Bible. Now, I am not an expert on the Bible, as Jez will tell you, by any means, even its construction. But as in my time with him, I've come to understand it was not written by a person. There wasn't a he, as you mentioned earlier, he, the writer. There wasn't a he. There were multiple he's written over, as I understand it, at least multiple decades, if not several centuries. And so this book, these words, are your only source, it seems to me, of evidence. And that, despite all the... one of the first great lectures I went to, with not lectures, but introductions from Jez, was about the Bible and its truth. And he made a sterling effort to defend it. But it is nonetheless simply a written text with words written by multiple people over multiple centuries. And that's the only data source you have.
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
I would say, first of all, obviously I agree with all the stuff. The Bible was written by multiple people in multiple, you know, time periods and all that sort of stuff. That kind of goes without saying. When I'm referring to he, I'm referring to the author of Genesis back in, you know, when we referred to that earlier, not the author of the whole Bible, as if someone sat down and wrote the whole thing. So we're happily agreed on that. I think if you take the whole Bible away, if we don't have the New Testament, don't look in it, can I demonstrate that there was someone called Jesus who was around in Israel at the time, doing the things that Jesus is alleged to have done in the New Testament? And was there a faith movement that sprung up around the belief in his divinity and resurrection from the dead? You can demonstrate all of those things without the New Testament. And so what I'm not doing is saying, hey, look at the New Testament. It says here Jesus rose from the dead. Isn't that great evidence? What I'm saying is, if we look at all the other kind of documentary texts that I could go to other than the New Testament, I can still build a case for Jesus existed and a faith movement based around his resurrection sprung into being and spread over 400 years around the entire known world. And the question that I ask myself in those situations is, what could have caused that? One answer is Jesus really was the Son of God, came into the earth and he rose from the dead. What other explanations are there? And when I look at those other possible explanations, they seem very, very weak compared to the Jesus explanation, which I'm using.
Rich, can I we've got a couple of minutes left before we finish, and it's gone to a really intriguing, interesting place, which might be worth a conversation for another time. I'd love a couple of your comments on the use of the intelligent design the intelligent design argument, the blind watchmaker thing. What if you could? I know you've hinted at that and talked about that loosely, but if you could just kind of clarify your thoughts on that. But then also, I just love your thoughts on even what you've just said there about outside the New Testament, a faith movement called Christianity sprung up and moved over 400 years. We're not. The existence of cults, that we might call them, springing up in other countries and over hundreds of years converting mass groups of people and spreading around the planet is not uncommon to us in our day. And so why would you say that Christianity is different from perhaps just another extreme cult that began,
Yeah, sure.
alongside other cults that begin. But perhaps begin with the watchmaker, and we'll come to the other one, and then Paul, a couple of comments from you before we finish.
Okay. Blind watchmaker, I don't really ever use that. I don't think it's that useful an argument. It was obviously cooked up, you know, a couple of hundred years ago, wasn't it, when Newtonian physics was being sort of lauded as the kind of key that unlocked every mystery of the universe. I don't really talk about intelligent design either as a way of looking at things. I know some Christians do and say, look, we're so incredibly made, it must be God. But personally, I've never found that a very convincing argument. So I would have no problem just crossing that off the list if you don't like it. I wouldn't particularly want to defend it.
What would you say about Paul's comment, though, the difference between the complexity of a watch and organic matter as it's evolved to its current form? That's where I think for you, Paul, it breaks down, because you think one is clearly designed and the other we can prove happens over millennia.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good point. And I think the difference between a watch is a watch can't manipulate and change itself. It just is. Whereas we know biologically, living organisms over generations can develop or evolve, if you want to call them that. So there's a fundamental difference between the two. I think the more, if I had to defend that kind of argument, I'd go where Anthony Flew, obviously the late atheist philosopher, went, which is not the complexity of life, but the existence of life. What is it that turns completely inanimate matter, such as a watch, into completely animate matter, something that's living and can reproduce itself? What is the fundamental difference between a stone and a snail? It's that idea of being able to reproduce itself and develop. And I think the process of developing is easy. You can just say, well, Darwinian evolution explains it. Let's not discuss anymore. But the process of how that started is still an open question in science. That doesn't mean God did it, but equally it doesn't mean God didn't do it in some shape or form. I
really appreciate to see your comment on that, because I've used it before and Paul shot me down several times, and I've always scratched my head going, why does he hate this so much? But how you put it there really helps me understand. So thank you. And just comment on the observation of cults then, and why you think Christianity is different, and why we should treat it with any more authority than other cults.
Okay, I think the first thing to say about modern cults, and by modern I probably mean the last 200, 250 years, well, maybe it's a bit longer than that. No, 300, 350, maybe something like that, is almost all of the cults that we are probably familiar with spring out of an existing worldview, as did Christianity, out of the existing Judaic faith. And there's always a certain level of continuity with them. Most cults out of the Christian kind of faith, Christian religion, tend to be, here's Christianity, but here's some little bits we've missed, and this makes it super exciting. And you could talk about the Jehovah's Witness thing or the Mormonism thing like that. But what I'm saying is there's a fertile ground for them to grow out of without a massive paradigm shift, I suppose, in how they view the world. The Christian faith springing out of the Judaic worldview and taking root in the Greco-Roman world of the time was completely at odds with both kind of prevailing in those two groups' views of the world, in that the Jews would believe there's going to be a physical resurrection at the end of time. So if you said Jesus has physically risen from the dead, they'll say, well, it's way too soon, it's nonsense. And the Roman philosophical view tended to be where it existed, that the soul's in the prison, imprisoned in the flesh, and when we die, it's released. So Jesus has physically risen from the dead, that's backwards, it's the wrong way round. And this is what I'm kind of getting to, I know you wanted to chip in, Paul, is that basically I think it comes down to the Christian faith didn't start by saying, hey, let's do something in continuity with what's gone before. The Christian faith said, we haven't got an idea that we think develops where we're at. We are saying there has been a historical event that has happened that has fundamentally caused us to rethink things. And even though nothing in our previous experience, either as Jews or as Gentiles converting to Christianity, lead us to suspect this is true, there's something about it that is so overpowering that it's forced us into it in a way that I think the Christian cults, which I'm more familiar with than other religious cults, don't do.
That's helpful. Thank you. No, really helpful clarity. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes, Paul. We'll give you a couple of minutes to reply, and then we'll have to let Rich go to your meeting.
Yeah, well, a couple of replies. One is certainly the thought about did Jesus exist? I mean, I'm not here to say he didn't. Maybe he did. But I like the way you went with that progress, which was, yeah, this person existed. Yeah, the Bible tells us, yes, he did exist. Yes, this happened. Yes. The real thing is, what's this got to do with God? And I think your point was, yeah, now here's an interesting thing. One explanation is, yeah, this guy was the Son of God. Another is, no, he's not. But the latter does beg a very significant question. If this guy wasn't, then how come it would spread so far, relatively fast, and so significantly? And that's a very significant question. And I'm sure maybe Christians have asked that many times. What alternative explanations are there to the Son of God question, given that we accept this person called Jesus existed? For me, though, the more significant question is what caused the first twitch, I think, in your phrase. And I've rehearsed with Jez on a number of occasions, a whole different set of conceptualizations of God. In fact, it's with that question that our relationship started, not more or less. Jez, tell me what your concept of God is. And we've rehearsed, and I could see the first twitch being a consequence of a universal energy force, like akin to electromagnetic force, which I currently am not wise enough to know about, see, understand. It doesn't interact with people. It had no intent. It had no purpose, but it exists universally, multi-universally, perhaps, and that's what caused the first twitch. Maybe this energy force does interact with life forms, but not with any intent. Not the one that requires to be deified, have buildings built, prayed to, sung to, money gathered to, and a whole number of things. It's just that whole edifice is a complete anathema to, it's a non-existent thing to a universal life force which exists. And that caused the first twitch. So for me, there are multiple different conceptions of, and here the language is significant. If I use the word God, it invokes everything which is, I think, where Jez and I's part come, is an intelligent, purposeful designer, one that has it done on purpose, as opposed to an energy form which transcends all life, but without any purpose. It just is, like the electromagnetic spectrum, exists there around us, all of us, in a way which, but not in a current Christian godlike way. There, for me, are different interpretations or explanations of the twitch that don't require the whole, therefore, panoply of Christianity, of all its rules, its regulations, its structures, its beliefs, to come into play to answer that critical question which you posed, which was, what caused the first twitch which set the first 1/10⁻60 step to take place? What was that? And I guess I find, not in front of me now, actually, refreshing, absolutely refreshing conversation, Rich, with you. Christian position, which is accepting of much of that and puts in a very balanced and cerebral way some of the key issues. But it would be useful, it would be interesting to discuss with you this notion of various concepts of a metaphors, a life force, a God force, and the issue, and where it therefore trips to need to be purposeful and intelligent for us to be here, to explain us to be here, and to what extent that does reinforce or deny the existence of all of that. But fascinating. Thank you, Rich. Thanks for your responses. And I think you did masterfully responding. I had a couple of weeks to think about it.
Well, yeah, guys, it has been really fascinating and really helpful. We haven't solved the problems, but we've shown that you can talk about them in a very reasonable manner. Rich, I know you've got a dash. Is there anything you want to throw in before you go? Or should we perhaps book a time to do this again?
I'm really happy to do it again. At the risk of showing you my cards before we play the next round, you know, if we do talk about all these different possibilities for what caused everything, I'm always going to be coming back to, they're all possible explanations, but for me, Jesus is the kind of card that I'm going to be laying a lot, saying, if I look at him, he's where I start to feel I've got some grip on the data that swings the needle one way or the other. It's when I come to Jesus, rather than kind of abstract arguments about things, that's where I come down on, I think God caused it rather than a universal force. that's where I'm going to go, but I'm happy to chat about it another time if that makes sense.
I guess well, the thing too is how you use the words interchangeably, Jesus and God, as if it's one and the same thing. And it's like, well, now once. But
I'm
anyway.
not using it interchangeably in those sentences at all. I'm talking about Jesus the man, and how do you answer the question of who he was? If he was who he says he was, that has strong implications for the idea that it was God who kicked things off.
Yeah.
And presumably that also has strong implications for the nature of that God that kicked things off. Because
because there's two discussions, isn't there? One discussion is there a personal God of some sort? The second question is it the Judeo-Christian God that's described in the New Testament? But
for another day, Rich, thank you so much. This is so good to have you with us, and lovely to introduce you to Paul. A conversation I've been wanting to have happen for a long time. So, wonderful. God bless you, Rich, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Paul.
Take care. It's lovely to meet you. Thanks for everything.
Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Well done. Bye bye.